told would be happening pretty soon. And here on one side we see forces loyal to the Libyan leader, Gaddafi. On the other, anti-government protesters. And reports of similar battles in the streets of the town of Misrata, which is also in the west of the country. When you're talking about events more than 1,000 kilometers to the east, protesters there say they've taken control of that part of the country. Residents of Benghazi say they've jailed so-called mercenaries. And apparently they say they've set up committees to run the city. And there have been a series of major defections undermining the authority of Gaddafi. This is General Solomon Mahmoud al-Obeidi, a man I spoke to on this program last night on the telephone, saying he'd had enough. And this is Gaddafi's cousin, Ahmed Khalaf al-Dam, defected to Cairo, he says, and now en route to Syria, part of Gaddafi's inner circle, as was the general. Meanwhile, the country's tribal leaders are meeting in Baida. This is one of those cities in the east of Libya to discuss what's happening. Now, some of the biggest tribes have now turned against Gaddafi. Now, with reports of more violence, the international community is trying to increase, in some way at least, pressure on the Libyan leader. Europe and Russia strongly condemning what they call the use of force against civilians and urging respect for human rights and international law. Barack Obama's vowed to work with other countries to hold Gaddafi's government accountable. The United Nations says attacks are a serious violation of human rights law, and those responsible should be punished. But a formal resolution requiring UN action is not immediately likely. Now, this, what we're going to hear now is the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, talking to Al Jazeera and reiterating his opinion that there will be consequences for those responsible for the violence.
Well, let me be clear. I think what Libya's authorities are doing is completely unacceptable. This violence, this meting out of vicious, brutal repression, including using aeroplanes, including troops on the streets, including live ammunition, is completely unacceptable, and it must stop. And I completely back what Barack Obama said last night about this. And these actions, yes, they must have consequences. Consequences in the UN Security Council, consequences for those responsible for them. And we should, as Barack Obama said, look at the full range of options in terms of doing that. And people in Libya need to think extremely carefully about what they are doing.
Well, that's the thought of David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, on events in Libya. And as Gaddafi tries to keep control, particularly of the Libyan capital, the US president's weighed in. Obama making his first public comments on the crackdown there on Wednesday. He called it outrageous and unacceptable. From Washington, Patty Culhane reports.
The world has been watching the images snuck out of Libya. Blood in the streets. Cries of pain and terror. The stories of overwhelming force and absolute carnage. After more than a week of relative silence, U.S. President Barack Obama voiced his concerns late Wednesday.
The suffering and bloodshed is outrageous, and it is unacceptable. So are threats and orders to shoot peaceful protesters and further punish the people of Libya. These actions violate international norms and every standard of common decency. This violence must stop.
U.S. presidents don't usually make such clear demands for fear that if they are ignored, they would have to act. So what is this president prepared to do?
I've also asked my administration to prepare the full range of options that we have to respond to this crisis. This includes those actions we may take and those we will coordinate with our allies and partners.
So far, he isn't giving much detail, but Obama is sending his Secretary of State to meet with allies at the Human Rights Council in Geneva next week.
While people are dying, the world's greatest power is preparing.
Still, the director of Human Rights Watch in D.C., Tom Malinowski, says the administration could be taking steps to send a message to the people around Muammar Gaddafi.
The U.S. could, for example, impose targeted sanctions on the Libyan government. It could block banks from conducting financial transactions.
Some have suggested a no-fly zone could be imposed. Pentagon officials say the U.S. has the assets in the area, but they are not currently preparing to take to the skies over Libya. The State Department says getting international approval to take that step would be difficult. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
It wasn't so very long ago that all eyes, ours as well, were on events in Egypt, and we're waiting to hear, whether the formulation of a new constitution has been agreed upon, and waiting to hear the date of any possible elections. We're told maybe 6 months from now. And we also hear that the former Egyptian information minister has been detained on corruption charges. He is Anas al-Fiki, arrested at his Cairo home on Thursday morning. Former state broadcasting chief Tuassam al-Sheikh was also arrested, and both of them have been given travel bans. Shireen Tadros, who covered much of the Egyptian revolution for us, is there for us once again in Cairo. Now, I'm getting a little bit confused about who has been given a travel ban from the old regime and who hasn't. So if you could just sort of go back to square one on this one for us, Shireen, and just fill us in on what stage we're at.
Yeah, David, you're right to be confused because the Egyptian Prosecutor General has been very active in the last few days. He's basically trying to bring to account those members of the former regime and any businessmen too who may have benefited from the corrupt running of that regime. So as you were saying there, the main developments are two main people, Anas al-Fiki, the former information minister, and indeed Osama al-Sheikh, as you were saying there, the chairman of state television. They have both been arrested and are facing corruption charges and charges to do with wasting public funds. The other main development that we should be talking about is to do with standing trial. Two men especially being given orders to stand trial from the Prosecutor General. Ahmed al-Aiz, you remember him, former member of the National Democratic Party and also a very close friend of Gamal Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak's son. He's been ordered to stand trial, as well as with two other ministers, the housing minister and the trade minister. And we don't have a precise date for that trial, but when it does happen, it will be the first trial of the old guard, if you like, and they will have to really explain themselves and their actions that they took under Mubarak's presidency.
A quick thought, Shireen, on when we're going to find out whether the constitution, the formulation of the new constitution, which will then go to a vote, when we'll know whether that's been finished.
Well, we're hearing now, David, that in fact tomorrow, Friday, is going to be the day when that committee that was charged with looking at the constitutional changes and amending some of the articles of the Constitution, they will be handing their suggestions to the Supreme Military Council. After that, we expect at some point, as promised by the Military Council, there will be a referendum so that the Egyptian people themselves can decide on what kind of constitution they want to see in place here.
Shireen, thank you very much indeed. Shireen Tadros in Cairo. And we've also been keeping a close eye on what's been happening in Yemen. The president there has instructed his security forces now to protect protesters who are trying to end his 32-year rule. Anti-government demonstration been going on there since an uprising against Ali Abdullah Saleh began on February the 16th. Hasham Akhalbara reports from the Yemeni capital, Sana'a.
Calls for change from the camp.